There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions, they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever will be.
Summer and winter and springtime and harvest, sun, moon, and stars in their courses above, join with all nature in manifold witness to thy great faithfulness, mercy, and love. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me.
Pardon for sin and a peace that endureth, thine own dear presence to cheer and to guide, strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow. Blessings all mine with 10,000 beside.
Great is thy faithfulness,
Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me.
take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee. Take my moments and my days, let them flow in ceaseless praise.
Take my hands and let them move at the impulse of thy love. Take my feet and let them be swift and beautiful for thee.
Take my voice and let me sing, always only for my King. Take my lips and let them be filled with messages from thee.
Take my silver and
Go well,
my
Al.
gold,
I hope they find it worth it.
not a mud, what
Now, don't do what I
I
used to do with my kids.
Take my
I'd be in
intellect and use every power as you choose.
Here am I,
Here am I, all of me.
take my life,
Take my life.
it's all for thee.
It's Take my heart, it is thine own. It shall be thy royal throne.
Take my love, my Lord, I pour at your feet, its treasure store.
Take myself and I will be ever only all for thee.
Take myself and I will be ever only all for thee.
Here am
Here am I,
all of me.
all of me.
Take my
Take my life,
it's all for thee.
it's all for thee. Take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee.
Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds a future, and life is worth the living just because he lives.
God sent his son, they called him Jesus. He came to love, heal and forgive. He lived and died to buy my pardon. An empty grave is there to prove my Savior lives. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives.
And then one day I'll cross the river. I'll fight life's fight. No war with pain. And then as death gives way to victory, I'll see the lights of glory, and I'll know he lives. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives.
And life is worth the living just because he lives.
Come now, fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace.
Adventist church. And I'm excited for this weekend. And a couple of years ago, I should say, 2005, it was more than a couple of years ago. 2005 in January, I showed up at the Adventist church headquarters as an intern. And shortly thereafter, this guy walks into my cubicle and he asks to borrow a pen. And then he looks at me and he's like, "You remind me of a friend of mine." And that was the beginning of my friendship with Clifford Goldstein. And his office was just down the hall from mine, so I saw quite a bit of him. And over the following months and a couple other tours of duty that I did there at the GC, we would enjoy many messy and delicious falafel lunches at Max's Kosher Deli. And we would have wide-ranging conversations about church and faith and politics, family, traveling Europe. And later I ended up attending the same church as Cliff there in Maryland. And I was impressed that Cliff, rather than having some august leadership position at his local church that might befit someone of his renown within the Adventist church, instead he volunteered to clean up after potluck and go around and pick up people's plates and stuff, and take out the trash. And I also appreciated that one Sabbath when I brought a friend with me to church, and my friend was not the church-going type, really. Cliff made a point to spend some time with him, talking with him, and connecting with him over their shared enjoyment of literature. And I very much appreciated that gesture. Cliff is also a man who deeply loves his family, and that was very obvious to me. He loves his church, and especially loves the Lord. He's basically a lifer at the Adventist church headquarters and has served for many years as editor of the Adult Sabbath School Bible Study Guide, or what most of us call Quarterly. And he's also written a bunch of books, possibly most famous, Graffiti in the Holy of Holies. And I'm excited to have him here this weekend. And I'll offer an opening prayer here, and then I'm so happy to welcome my friend Clifford Goldstein. Lord, thank you so much for this time that we can spend together, and thank you for Cliff and his ministry, and I ask for your blessing on him this weekend and your blessing on all of us, those here and those watching, and we're just grateful for everything you do for us, and we love you. We pray in your name. Amen.
The only thing I'm used to not seeing people for years. Then when I see them, they get gray and bald and whatever, and I would look at Steve, and he looks as young as he ever did when I knew him at the GC. Oh, hey, Twyla. Oh, my goodness. Well, don't go away. Don't go away, yeah. I grew up in a very secular home, secular Jewish home, and I joked that the way we did the Jewish holidays was like they tried to kill us, they failed, let's eat. Okay? And that was the extent of my religious upbringing, and if that much. And I was raised very secular, and in many ways I was very postmodern. You have your truth, and that's your truth, and you have your truth, and that's yours, and it didn't matter if they were logically incompatible because they were just your personal truths, and there was no transcendent Archimedean point to look down on and judge. Truth was personal, relative, cultural, and I just imbibed on that, was educated and raised on that as far back as I can remember, and that's what I believed. And at the same time, I had always I'd always been somewhat of a seeker, and I liked philosophy. And I can remember I was 21 years old, and I was sitting in a pizza parlor in Gainesville, Florida, University of Florida, and I was eating a pizza and drinking a non-Adventist beverage, and I was reading a philosopher. Now, it's kind of ironic, because over the years when I read this philosopher now, there isn't one thing this man said that I don't think was pure, unadulterated garbage. I mean, I think this man got everything wrong. But there was one line early on in the book that just changed my life. And in it, there was something to the effect of, in order to live the most perfect life upon the earth, you needed to find out the reason why you were here and live your life accordingly. Well, for some reason, those words went into my head almost like they used to do lobotomies in the great days of neurology. You're messed up, so they take a shiv and just shove it behind your eye and wipe out the bad neurons. Well, you can imagine how well that worked. But it was almost like this went in and completely wiped out all that relativism. Because it boiled down to this. There was the pizza sitting on the table in front of me. Now, you could have had 1,000 different people with 1,000 different views on how the pizza got there. They might have thought the Babylonian god Marduk created the pizza. Maybe aliens in a flying saucer dropped the pizza. Maybe in a bottle. You could have had 1,000, 10,000 different people with 10,000 different views on the pizza. Views they would kill or die for the pizza. And maybe every last one of them was completely wrong. Maybe nobody could ever know the origins of the pizza. But the fact is, here was the pizza. It was here, somewhere out there, whether any human being could have ever known where it came from. Something had to have created the pizza and put it there. And whatever it was, that was the truth about the pizza. And at that moment, it just hit me. I'm here. The ground's here. The world, the universe is here. There's something here like the pizza was here. And in the same way that something had to explain the pizza, something had to explain the universe. I don't care how many layers of my mind filtered from what's out there to the way I interpret it. There was something there. Maybe we're all in the Matrix. Maybe we're all whatever. That was fine. That would have been the truth. But the fact is, there was something here, and something had to explain it. And whatever that was the truth with the capital T. In other words, it hit me that truth had to exist. Now, you might have thought, well, it took you to 21 to come to that. I mean, Mickey Mouse could have told you that. But I'm just telling you, the way I was raised, that moment, it blew my mind. And I'll never forget. I can still remember this. I walked out of the pizza parlor. I'm walking through the streets of Gainesville, Florida at night. And I felt it. See, even though I knew that truth had to exist. I can't be wrong about that. And I say that to this day. I can't be wrong. But that was a total different thing from the fact whether I or anyone could ever know what it was, okay? The fancy philosophical terms, the first thing, truth had to exist, ontology, the nature of being, okay? But the question I had was an epistemological question, the nature of knowledge. It had to exist, but that was a totally separate issue from whether I or anyone could ever know it. But I still remember walking down the street, and I felt this, I felt it so bad, I felt the pain in my chest. And I remember thinking to myself, if it were humanly possible, okay? I mean, I don't want to use the word sacred. That's the wrong word because that's too religious. It was almost this duty. I don't know where it came from, but I thought to myself, if it were humanly possible, because I realized the fact that something had to explain all this was a total separate issue from whether I could know it. One did not lead necessarily to the other. But I remember, I felt this pain thinking, if it were humanly possible to know what this truth was, I thought I wanted to know it. I didn't care where it led me, what it cost me, what I had to suffer, what I had to give up. If I could know it, I wanted to know it no matter what. And all I know is about 3 years later, I ended up becoming a Seventh-day Adventist. Now, that's remarkable for a lot of reasons. Because growing up, I knew one Seventh-day Adventist my whole life. And we used to smoke pot together. We would get high and he'd witness to me. And I used to think, oh, this guy must be part of some Rastafarian religion or something. Okay, now this actually does have a happy ending because about 25 years later, he came back to the church and we ended up having lunch at the GC together. Okay, but that was the only Adventist I knew. And the other thing, in my life, there were two kinds of people I used to hate. I used to hate Christians, and I'm serious, I used to hate vegetarians. I was so carnivorous. I was so into eating meat. I could remember mocking vegetarians. It was all I could do to keep from spitting in their carrots. That's how much disdain I had for it. Now, my animosity towards Christianity, though, was a lot deeper seated, though, than towards vegetarians, because even though I wasn't raised religious Jew, I was raised Jewish. And for secular Jews, your religion is the Holocaust. Okay, I was raised, my parents lived through it, and they did, and it messed them up. And I don't think, but consciously or subconsciously, they did their darndest to mess up their kids with it. And I was raised on this stuff. I can name you every Nazi concentration camp and how many Jews they murdered in each one. I couldn't tell you where the 10 Commandments were in the Bible. Okay. And I was bitter. All this, the Holocaust was just the culmination of centuries of church-inspired, Christian, quote-unquote, inspired persecution by Catholics. And don't kid yourself, the Protestants weren't a whole lot better. The Holocaust, Protestant, Lutheran Germany. That's the legacy that Protestantism and Lutheranism gave them, the Holocaust. So I was bitter against Christianity. And I used to take my frustrations out. There was this hellfire and brimstone preacher who used to come to the University of Florida I was in school, named Jed Smock. And Jed would get out on the campus and he'd have the Bible in his hand and he'd just start preaching hellfire and brimstone. And he'd get a crowd of kids in the circle. And they would harangue him and they would mock him from the circle. But I was never content to stand in the circle, with the students. I'd get in the center of that circle. And I'd be in his face. I'd curse him. I'd curse his mother. I'd curse his Bible. I'd curse his God. I mean, I got so bad, I could have gotten arrested for what I did to that guy. And he used to damn me to hell. He used to swear there was no hope for me. And he was a charismatic, and he'd put his hands on me and speak in tongues, cast demons out of me, and I'd start drooling and writhing and it got so bad my friends eventually nicknamed me Heckle. And it was so funny, about 5 years ago I got an email from someone. He said, I couldn't remember your first name, but I remembered you as Heckle. And whatever it was, that I showed my wife, because she's been listening to me tell this story for decades now, and I said, see, I told you it was Ultra. We remembered me as Heckle. Well, anyway, this went on for years, or for the few years I was at the school, till I graduated the University of Florida. And it was the mid-1970s. And at this time of my life, I had one goal and one goal alone. I was going to be a novelist, or I was going to be nothing. And I've got writers and editors and novelists in my family. My uncle when he died, the New York Times had a whole half-page spread on my uncle, and fiction writer. And I had started this novel my senior year at college. And I mean, I'm in my early 20s. The book consumed me. Nothing mattered but my book. In many ways, the book controlled my life more than I controlled the life of the characters. Nothing mattered. I finished school, even though I was an English major. I just wanted to get college out of the way, because all I wanted to do was write my novel. Eventually I found a title, The Garden of Animals. But anyway, I graduate college and I go back home to Miami Beach, Surfside. I grew up 3 blocks from where the condo crashed. I was there about 2 weeks ago, and right there I grew up, Miami Beach. And I was back in Miami Beach a little while, and I decided I'm going to work on the novel in Europe, because part of the novel took place in Europe. So I'm in Miami Beach a little while. I had a little bit of money left over from school, and I go to Europe. Now, I had been to Europe. I had been to Europe a couple times before. I had lived in Sweden, knew the language, and I had been there a bunch of times, and the novel was going to take place there. So I'm hitchhiking around England, and they almost didn't let me in the country. And that was I had the stamp on my passport. I'm only allowed to be there 30 days, and I cannot work. Well, the whole purpose of me going over there was to spend a year there, find any kind of work I could do, and work on my novel. So things right off the bat weren't going great. And then I'm hitchhiking around England, and things aren't working out, and I decide I'm going to go to Sweden. I'm going to go back to Sweden. So I hitchhike to the British coast, and I take a boat from Sweden to Holland. And then I'm going to get in Holland, I'm going to hitchhike north. Well, I mean, the whole time I'm hitching in England, it rained on me. And you go to Holland, it rains even more in Holland. And I'm going off the gangplank, walking down, and it's cold and it's rainy. And there's a guy ahead of me with a backpack. And on this backpack, I had a backpack on, and his backpack, he's got a sign that says Greece. You know, I'm thinking the beaches, you know, I'm a Miami Beach boy, you know, and I'm going to Sweden. So I walk up to him and say, hey, man, are you hitching to Sweden, to Greece? And he goes, yeah. Ah, man, what a coincidence. So am I. You want to hitch together? And he said, sure. So just like that, I changed my mind. So on one side of the road, instead of hitching to Switzerland, I'm with this guy, and we're hitchhiking to Greece. Well, two guys with backpacks in the rain, we're not getting anywhere. So finally, we just split up, okay? And I just hitchhiked on my own. And it took me 4 long, hard, hot days. I mean, I practically walked through communist Yugoslavia. And I get to Athens. And I had a friend who had lived in the city, and he said, if you get to Athens, come visit me. I can get you a place and a job or something, whatever. So after 4 days, I'm burned out, and I'm in the city, and I got to take a bus and a whatever. And I finally get to this house around sundown, and I knock on the door, and this little old lady comes out. And I say, Faunus, is Faunus here? And she says, Faunus no here. Faunus in Miami. So I let out a wail, and I guess she feels sorry for me. She gives me a meal, and an hour later, I'm back out in the streets of Athens. I have no idea where I'm going to go, what I'm going to do. I mean, I didn't know where I was going to sleep that night, much less the rest of my life. And I finally found some bushes along a wall. And I just laid my sleeping bag out in the bushes and went to sleep. I wish I could travel like that now. It's definitely, I need more comfort now. But I was fine, and I laid the sleeping bag and I went to sleep. And that night I had a dream. Now, at this stage of my life, no matter how illogical the whole metaphysical materialism is, that's how I believed. And everything was purely atoms in the void. Nothing super, nothing like that. And so dreams meant nothing. Dreams were, did your mother breastfeed you long enough when you were a baby, and what you ate for dinner? That's all that dreams were. Anyway, so I had this dream, and I do find it incredibly ironic that I would have this dream, as it fits in my story, in all places, Athens. If you know philosophy, that's sort of the foundation of this whole secular worldview. But anyway, I have this dream. And in the dream, I'm dreaming that I'm sleeping in the bushes. Then I wake up, and I dreamt that I flew to Israel to live on a kibbutz in Israel and work on my novel. Now, kibbutz, Americans don't know that much. I don't want to... It's a cross between self-supporting work and a commune. Okay, and even that's a pretty bad analogy. But there are these kibbutzim, and they take volunteers, and you could work. And anyway, that was my dream. And I wake up, and I remember the dream, and I think, wow, that's not a bad idea. And for some reason, I remember there was a travel agency across the street that opened at 9 o'clock. And following my dream, I go to the travel agency, I book a ticket to Israel, and 2-3 days later, I'm on a kibbutz in northern Israel, right on the Golan Heights, right on the Syrian border, working on the kibbutz and writing and working on my novel. just as I had dreamt. And I loved it. I worked 30 hours a week, and the rest of the time was mine to write my book. I poured everything into my novel. Now, I'm on the kibbutz. I'm going to give you 2 details. And you're going to just store these details because they become important later. Don't forget them. When I was working on my novel, any writer, you just read. And I was obsessed. I'm not as bad now as I used to be, though I'm still bad enough. I was obsessed with poetry. And I just read. Sometimes I think I taught myself how to write by reading poetry, even though when you wrote prose, you don't write poetry, you write prose. But I read a lot of poetry. And there was this one book of poems by this woman named Sylvia Plath. And woo, nothing I had read had impacted me more than this book of poems. When I would later meet people from the kibbutz I knew there, I used to say to them, remember I used to make you sit there whether you wanted to or not and listen to me read you this woman's poems. I mean, the stuff just blew me away, and it was real heavy stuff. I mean, at one point the woman, if you know her story, she gives her kids cookies and milk, goes down, writes this poem, then sticks towels around the door, and in the room next door to her kids turns the oven on and sticks her head in the oven and kills herself. Okay? It's kind of heavy stuff. But nothing impacted me more than the poems by Sylvia Plath. So remember Sylvia Plath. And secondly, when I was on the kibbutz, I had a blonde Danish girlfriend. Her name was Tina. So just remember, Sylvia Plath and Tina. Anyway, I get to this kibbutz, and I'm there a couple weeks, and who should show up but a group of these fundamentalist religious Christians from America, exactly like the guy I used to harangue, okay? And they were there. They're these evangelicals. Can you hear me all right? Is this all right? And they were there to try to kind of be like silent witnesses to the Jews. You know, they're dispensationalists. You know, the turn of Jews fulfills prophecy. And, 200 million Chinese are going to come down and invade Israel in the valley of Megiddo. And God's going to rapture the church, and 144,000 Jewish virgins are going to preach the gospel. I mean, I know people believe this Meshuggah stuff. So if you got any Jewish friends, ask them Meshuggah. But anyway, they're serious about it. And they were there to be silent witness. Well, I was furious. You know, here I was, I'm in the boonies of the only Jewish state since the Bar Kokhba rebellion in like AD 138 or whatever it was, and they got all these Christians there. So I started haranguing them and harassing them, because believe me, I was good at it. And it got to the point where it really got out of hand. And the Israelis, I didn't get along with the Israelis to begin with, and they were always looking for some reason to throw me off. And it got to the point where they said, if you don't leave these people alone, we're going to kick you off the kibbutz. So I backed off, because all that mattered to me was working on my novel. That's all that mattered. And I had now put over another year on the novel, over 2 years. And then I decided after a while, I'm going to go back to Europe to work on the novel in Europe, which was my original intention. So I leave the kibbutz and I hitchhike up to Copenhagen. And in the middle of Copenhagen, there had been this vast military barracks. And the army had abandoned it, and it was like almost like this hippie community in the middle of the city called Christenia. And I had been there before, and part of my novel was going to take place there. So I hitchhiked back up to the place, and I don't know, I get up there, and the place was a whole lot scroungier. And it was not the way I remembered it. I mean, I think half the drug addicts in Europe live there. Every day someone was dying of a drug overdose, and I think half of Europe's fugitives were hiding there. I mean, the place definitely wasn't the way I had remembered it a couple years earlier. And just to give you an example of what it's like, I'm walking through this muddy courtyard in the place, and I hear this woman screaming. And I look over, and some guy's beating on this girl. And then she's on the ground, and he's stomping her, and he's kicking her. And I'm just thinking, I don't want to get involved in this. So I try to keep walking, but, my conscience bothers me. So I walk over. And as soon as I do, he stops beating on her, and she gets up and runs away. And then I thought, I did my good deed for the day, and I start to walk away. Well, the next thing I know, this guy, some strung out little junkie, I'm sure, he turns around when I'm not looking and just sucker punches me, smashes me right in the mouth. I ain't all that big and heavy, and I've got a little gut. It's taken me 65 years to get this thing. My wife keeps telling me to get rid of it, but I'm kind of proud of it, okay? But I'm not very big and strong. But I used to box in college. Okay, I used to box in a bag all the time. I got into the ring one time, and then I went back to the bag because the bag never hit me back. Okay, I got my head handed to me in the ring. But anyway, the guy punches me. Well, if he didn't take me out, which he did, it was a problem for him. And I just turned around and I didn't even think about it. And just boom, boom, boom. 1, 2, 3. Just flat out laid him out. Well, the problem was when he hit me, he knocked my glasses off. My eyes are so bad, they won't do LASIK on me. They want to get it perfect. They want their records perfect, and they're never going to get me at 20/20. Well, anyway, I can't find my glasses, and I don't want to be groping around for my glasses. So I grab this jerk by his head, and I go, find my glasses. So I get my glasses, and then I'm done with this guy. And I'm thinking, I don't want any more trouble with this guy. So I say, look, man, go get marriage counseling or something, And then I take him and I throw him on the ground. Well, as it would have it, I'm an old busted up skydiver. And I got a weak knee and a weak back. Because skydiving is not like it was today, back then, with all those square chutes. You could land on an egg and not break it. It wasn't like that when I was jumping. Though come to think of it, I hurt myself on one of those square ones. But anyway, I throw the guy on the ground, and instantly my knee and my back give out. Both at the same time. In fact, I could sue that hotel I'm in. There's no mat in the shower. And I slipped in it today, and my bum knee almost went out on me. I could feel the meniscus just sort of scream a little. But anyway, the knee and back give out, and the guy gets up and he pulls a knife and says, I'm going to kill you, man. Well, boxing or no boxing, somebody comes at you with a weapon, a knife, you run. And it's like out of Keystone Cops. I'm yelling, help, police, help, and I'm running down the street. It didn't do my knee and back any good. And he's chasing me with the knife, saying he's going to kill me. And amazingly, the cops show up. They take us down to the station. And an hour later, I'm back out on, the cop says, well, there's nothing we can do. According to Danish law, the knife isn't long enough to make an arrest. Okay, it was long enough to put in my back. But anyway, The bottom line is I'm back out on the street. I got a big fat lip from where he punched me in the mouth. My knee's hurting, my back's hurting, and now I'm kind of constantly looking over my shoulder because, I'm in the same place where this guy was. The bottom line, what I'm saying here is things aren't going particularly well for me. Okay? Then on top of it, I had a friend who lived in another part of town. And I'm not even going to begin to tell you how I met him. You're going to have a hard enough time believing what I tell you now. Nobody would believe that story, so I'm not even going to get into it. But this guy lived in a swanky part of town. And I go visit him. And this guy was really deep in the occult and in spiritualism. And I mean, it was creepy in his apartment. I mean, I don't believe in any of that stuff, but it was so weird. And this guy would get in these drunken stupors, and he'd sit in a chair, and he'd stomp the ground, and he'd wail, and he'd shriek. And I mean, he'd sit there, he would urinate in his pants. He wouldn't get up and just shriek and wail. And I'm looking at this guy one day, and I don't know what, this guy's so messed up, he needed anything. So I, of all people, I look at this guy and say, hey man, have you ever thought of Jesus? And as soon as I say the name Jesus, he stops the stomping and he looks up at me with one eye. Don't ask me what in the world that was about. He looks up at me with one eye and he says, 20 years ago, I asked for Jesus. Instead, I got the devil. Now, folks, back then, Jesus, the devil, the good tooth fairy, Moses, whatever, it was all meant nothing to me. But that so creeped me out. I just left. I said, I got to get out of here. And I left the guy's apartment. At that point, I said, I just got to get out of here. And I traveled enough to know you can't get away from yourself by traveling. But I said, I got to go. And I left, and I ended up going to Paris. And in Paris, I had been on the road a lot, and mostly by myself since I was 17 years old. And I was used to being alone, but for some reason, the loneliness and my knee hurt and my back hurt, and I had other issues. In other words, things in my life were starting to spiral down. And it was pretty much the only time in my life where I said, okay, Cliff, you can do A, you can do B, or you can kill yourself. And I can still remember there was the Eiffel Tower. I remember where I was, and I was with my wife in Paris a while back, and I said, you've heard the story. Here's where I was standing when I said this. And it was this moment where whether I shook a fist up in the air or not, I don't know. And I said, all right, God, if you exist, I need a sign. And little did I know later, what does the Bible say? Greeks seek for wisdom, Jews seek for a sign. Okay, here's a guy that didn't know the Old Testament from the New. And I said, God, if you exist, you've got to reveal yourself to me. I need a sign. Otherwise, I will never believe ever. And with that, I left. And I go back to Israel. And I'm going to try to go back to my old kibbutz because I just want to pick up on my novel. 2.5 years on my book. It was all that mattered to me, was writing this novel. And I go back to my old kibbutz, and they won't let me back on. Okay, they got rid of me. They're not letting me back. And I remember I told the Christians on the kibbutz, I remember telling them what I said in Paris. I said, I asked, And I remember this one guy said, well, if you asked, he'll reveal himself to you. I said, all right, fine, okay. Well, anyway, I need to go to another kibbutz. Keep working on my book. Well, you just don't show up at a kibbutz, knock on the door and say, I'm here. You go to an office in Tel Aviv. You go to the main office. And it was funny, too, because I'm wandering through Tel Aviv looking for the office, and I can't find it. And on a bus, I meet a German guy who lived on the kibbutz. And he was a German Gentile. I guess he had Nazis in his family and was guilty. And I never particularly liked the guy. It didn't have anything to do with him being German. We just didn't get along. But I meet him on the bus, and he goes out of his way. He stays on the bus with me, stays on the stop till I get off where I need to go. And I still remember the kindness. I mean, he really seemed genuinely happy to see me. And even to this day, I just feel this endearment and how nice he was. But it was something else. He got me to the place at the timing I did. And I get there. And I get to the office to get assigned to a kibbutz. So I'm in the office. There's a woman at the desk. And there's a boy sitting in the office. He's ahead of me, there to get assigned to a kibbutz. So I'm sitting there just twiddling my thumbs, and I look over on the desk, and I see a sheet of paper. And it says Clifford Goldstein. So I interrupted the woman and said, ma'am, how did you know I was coming? And she says, I didn't know you were coming. Who are you? And I point to the sheet of paper and I say, Clifford Goldstein. Well, the boy who was sitting there, he jumps up and says, no, that's my paper. My name is Clifford Goldstein. All right, sure. Clifford Goldstein's not the most common name in the world. But I mean, folks, we were in Tel Aviv, okay? And then I said, Cliff, where are you from? And he says, Miami Beach. I grew up in Miami Beach. And the thing was, when I told my mother the story, she said that years earlier, we used to get his doctor bills, would come to our house. So we shared the same pediatrician as kids. So he's there, and he's there to get assigned to a kibbutz. And I said, Cliff, have I got the kibbutz for you? Go to my old kibbutz and just tell them your name is Clifford Goldstein and you're from Miami Beach and see what happens. And she goes, they let that Clifford Goldstein on. They wouldn't let this Clifford Goldstein back. But anyway, he goes to the kibbutz. And I get assigned to another kibbutz, but I'm there for a little while, and I'm not getting my act together. And I'm going to go back to the States. So I go back to my old kibbutz for a visit. And of all the different rooms on the kibbutz where they put the volunteers, there's like 30 different rooms. Clifford Goldstein was in the same room that I had been on when I was on the kibbutz. And not only that, there were 2 beds in the room. And he was sleeping in the same bed I was sleeping in. So we're sitting there. He's sitting at the head of his bed. I'm sitting at the end. And we're talking, and we're kind of laughing at this. This is a little strange. But still not thinking that much of it. And I look above the bed. There was just a board in the wall, which was the bookshelf. And I see a whole bunch of my old books on the bookshelf. And you like books, I like books. And if you like the books I like, then I really like you. And I said, Cliff, you like my books? because I just left them all there when I hitchhiked through to Denmark. And he goes, what are you talking about? He said, those are all my books. And I remember saying to him, no way. And I reached up and I grabbed the book of poetry by Sylvia Plath. Same author, same title, same edition. Only it's not my book, it's his book. And I'm thinking, I thought I was the only dork that read this stuff. And I said, Cliff, are you a writer? And he says, yeah, I think I want to write. And I came to Israel to write. Then, we're talking, absorbing this. And this girl walks into the room. I never saw her before in my life. It's his girlfriend. She's blonde. She's from Denmark. And her name is Tina. Okay? Now, what do you do with this? What do I do with this? I go down to the Christians, and I'll never forget this one guy. He says to me, he says, Cliff, you're asking God for signs. He goes, man, he says, what more do you want? The Lord's calling you by name. Now, when he says this to me, I remember I walk outside, and I'm thinking about this, and I'm realizing this can't be a coincidence. And if it's not a coincidence, and I really remember this too, it's like the first time in my life I look up and it's almost like with a little bit of fear and a little bit of reverence, because at that moment I know there's got to be more out there. Well, anyway, the next day, these Christians whom I harangued and I harassed that whole time on the kibbutz, they take me down to the Jordan River about 100 yards away, and they baptize me, and they give me a Bible, and I come back to the States. Now, the only problem was I was no more born again than a corpse, okay? It was very heavy meeting my double. I mean, I knew there had to be more out there than the way I had been raised my whole life to believe. There had to be some kind of central casting upstairs or something. But outside of that, nothing changed. I went back to Gainesville, Florida, picked up my novel, and just did everything I could to eke out an existence, because all that mattered to me was my book. I'd put now about 2.5 years in my novel. Now I want to backtrack a little and then come back. When I was in Israel, I laid down one afternoon, take a little nap, and I felt this strange tingling in my toes. And I felt it rolling up my body until it centered in my head. And I felt this loud pounding in my head, and I had the sensation I was going through a wind tunnel, and it was horrific. And I sat up. Ooh, it was a horrible feeling. And then it started to happen to me again. And then again, every time I took a nap. And it was very frightening, and I didn't like it. And then I get back to Gainesville, and I tell myself, the next time this happens, don't fight it. So I lay there, tingling in my toes, this pounding in my head, and I mean, like you're going through this wind tunnel, and I say, don't fight it, don't fight it. And the next thing I know is, zoosh. I feel myself go right out of my body. And I go right through the ceiling. And the next thing I know, I'm hovering in the air in this gray, crackly mist in the air outside the second-story apartment of a couple friends of mine who were into Guru Maharaji. Okay, and then the next thing I know, boom. I mean, it's terribly frightening. I'm back in my body. Now, please, folks, understand, I am a hardcore Seventh-day Adventist today. I understand perfectly, mind-body duality. Are you kidding me? I don't have a clue and nobody else has a clue what's going on. All I know is that I know now there's no such thing I know now as a separate, conscious, immortal soul that exists apart from the body. I know that now. But there's nothing anybody could have said to me back then that would have convinced me that that was anything other than my soul leaving my body. And I thought, maybe the occult, maybe spiritualism is where the truth is I'm looking for. Because I didn't have any relationship with God. Those Christians gave me that Bible, and I try to read I couldn't get past the talking snake. Okay? And so it was like there was nothing there. But I thought maybe the occult, this was the truth I was looking for. So I'm on my way over to the library at the University of Florida to get a book on the occult. And I really was a starving writer. I needed a job. And I just happened to walk past a health food store. And though I hated vegetarians, what will a man give in exchange for his soul? I needed a job. So I knock on the door of this health food store. It was closed. And some guy comes out. And we start talking. And I tell him what I'm into. And he goes, "What?" And he pulls me in the health food store. And he locks the door. Okay. And then he starts, I tell him what I'm into. And he starts warning me it's demonic. Demonic. Come on. Telling a guy like me about demonic, he might as well told me Santa wouldn't come down the chimney on Christmas if I was bad. It's like, give me a break. But he says, "Here, read this book." So he hands me a book, and I'm a writer, so I'm a reader. So I walk over to the library, and I wasn't in school then, and I get a book on the occult. So I couldn't check the book out. And so I sit there in the library and I read the first chapter of the occult book, and I practice the first technique. And for the decades I've been telling this story, I never said what it was, but maybe I ought to give you a warning. It says, sit there, and it's the first chapter. Focus on a point in the back of your head. So I sit there and I do that. And then I'm going to go put the book back. First chapter. The bottom line is I'm walking through the library, and literally in one hand, literally for the first time in my life, I got this book on the occult that I'm reading. Just practice it. In one hand, I got that, and literally in my other hand, I have the book the guy handed me in the health food store. Cult book in one hand, The Great Controversy in the other. I was clueless. Utterly clueless. And I started reading Great Con. I started reading it, and I was enjoying it, though. You know, she started lauding Martin Luther. You know, I mean, if you knew, Adventists don't want to hear that side. All they want is the great controversy side of Martin Luther, which is fine. He was a snake in the grass, a wicked, evil guy, but God used him anyway. I mean, Luther, don't get me started on that man. Well, maybe I shouldn't. God used him despite himself. But the stuff he wrote about the Jews, the Nazis used Luther and the stuff he wrote about the Jews. So anyway, I wasn't particularly enamored at that, but I was going to read the book. But anyway, I go back. I'm back working on my novel. And one evening, about a day or two later, that knee, that shower today. But anyway, I go back, sun is setting, I go back to my room to work on my novel. I put 2.5 years in the book. Nothing else mattered to me than writing my novel. If you ask me, did I believe in God? Did I believe in Jesus? Well, between the occult experiences and meeting my double, I mean, I knew there was a greater reality out there than what I had been raised on, okay? And Jesus, Jesus was all right. I had been baptized, okay? But, it just nothing changed. All that mattered was my book. I come back to my little room in Gainesville, Florida. I sit down at my desk, got my typewriter, and please understand, this was 1979. I didn't have stuff in the cloud. Okay, I had a manual typewriter. I sit down to get ready to work on my novel. And for some reason, before I begin, I close my eyes to utter a prayer. And I didn't know who I was praying to. I don't know what I prayed, just a few seconds. But somehow, in what Adventist theologian John Peckham calls the rules of engagement, see, Satan had me. In fact, I was already weaving the occult stuff into my novel. I was writing about it. I didn't know where it was going to go. Satan had me. But somehow, just uttering that prayer, that was the only opening the Lord needed. And at that moment, as real to me as anything, the presence of the Lord Jesus Christ came to me in the room. Instantly, I knew who he was, and instantly I knew what he wanted. And his exact words to me were, "Cliff, you have been playing with me long enough. If," I can't tell you how important that if is, "if you want me tonight, burn your novel." In that instant, he showed me that novel. That was the instant. That novel was my God. "You shall have no other gods before me." I didn't know that Bible text, but at that moment I knew. And I said, "God, please, I'll write this book all to your glory. If you want me tonight, burn the novel." I said, "God, please, let me just finish it. And then I'll give my life to you. If you want me tonight, burn the novel. God, please, can't we just put this away and pick it up another day? If you want me, burn the book." And I jumped up and I burst into tears. I could have slit my throat easier. I had nothing else. I had nothing else, nothing else. I poured everything. My friends were getting degrees and this and that, and I poured everything into the book. And now I had to give it up. I couldn't do it. And I got up and I jumped out of the room, and I just wandered through the streets of Gainesville. And these were the same streets that I wandered through when I walked out of the pizza parlor a few years earlier. Exact streets, saying I wanted to know the truth no matter the cost. And suddenly now the cost? You can't be serious. I couldn't do it. I just wasn't going to do it. I mean, I had nothing. And I remember a whole lot of stuff going through my mind. And I remember I stopped underneath this street lamp. And why I remember the detail and why I always mention it, I don't know. I guess hooks, this happened in 1979. It's a long way. I remember these bugs flying around the lamp, casting these shadows on the ground. And I remember I stopped and I said, okay, God, I want you. I want truth more than I want this book. But if you want it burned, you're going to have to burn it for me. But once I made that choice, God might not force, but I did sort of feel this grip around my neck. And yet the moment I made that choice, it's like everything lifted off of me. And I'm telling you, I was clueless. If you would have said to me that night, Cliff, you're a sinner, you might as well tell me I came from Mars. I had no conception. I mean, I knew nothing about theology. All I knew about theology was a Hal Lindsey book I read. I knew nothing about anything. All I know is I met God that night. And I had to do this. And I went back to my room, 23 years old, 2.5 years of my life. It was funny. It took me, anyway, there was a hot plate, 2-burner hot plate that my mother had given me, hoping I would cook some food. And I just took the manuscript, 2.5 years, in my room, set the manuscript on the hot plate, turn the knob, and burn the novel. And that was the night I became a born-again believer. And I have never been sorry since. And let me just tie a few loose ends up. That was the night I was born again. And those occult experiences, we've all read, they're so common now. People have near-death experiences. And they leave their body and they meet their dead relative. I mean, this is the exact phenomena that they had. That's exactly what I experienced. But I wasn't anywhere near dead. Somehow the devil got a hook in me. And the devil saw, Cliff's getting spiritual. Well, the devil's religious. He'll give you spiritual stuff. But the moment I gave my heart to Christ that night, I'm convinced it was all demonic hallucinations. I mean, they leave their bodies and they meet their dead relatives. We know enough to know that can't be what it is. But all I know is when I burned the novel that night, those occult experiences never came back. Greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. And that preacher I used to harass, he came back to town. And I walk up to him, and he probably thinks, here we go again. Only this time I witnessed with him to students in the crowd who remembered me as Heckle. And then anyway, the folks I met, I started hanging out in that health food store. They were Adventists. And eventually I came in the church through them. It was a good 6-8 months from the time I met them. You folks born and raised in the church, you have no idea how bizarre it all appears outside of the food. Oh, I said, do you guys eat anything that's real? I mean, it was, but maybe 2-3 weeks, I'm studying, and I'm standing in front of the health food store, getting ready to cross the street. And this car drives by. And I think, all right, I could run past it, but I'm not one to overly exert myself if I don't need to. So I stop, and the car drives by. Who do you think's in the car? Clifford Goldstein. Last time I saw him was on the kibbutz in the Galilee. And it's funny, there's a Dr. Clifford. I'm pretty sure I found him on Facebook out in LA now, but he won't have anything to do with me. He won't friend me or anything, but so funny, there is a young Dr. Clifford Goldstein who's a gynecologist in Manhasset. He's a gynecologist, and every now and then his patients email me. And it's the hilarious, intimate stuff these women email me. And I said, well, you want my advice, I'll tell you what to do, but you probably ought to see the other Clifford Goldstein. But anyway, Clifford Goldstein, and that was the last time I saw him. And anyway, I want to end this now. And I generally don't preach this long. I won't preach this long tomorrow. Don't worry, it won't be as good tomorrow. This is about the best I got. And, I usually go to bed at 7 o'clock, East Coast time. So I'm zombified. When I burned that novel that night, I realized I might not ever write again. It was done. It's the only thing I had any interest in. It's the only thing I had a lick of talent for. I mean, I am useless in anything else. I don't have any desire to be any good in anything else. And I died to the novel. Thought, all right. And for about 2 years, didn't write a thing. Then one day, the door opened up for me to write an article. And I wrote an article, and I published it. And you'll never guess what it's on. You couldn't. It was on the advantages of being a vegetarian. and the point is, I hadn't stopped writing since then. The Lord gave it back. I had to die to it. I had to die, and it was funny because for 2 years, it took me 2 years of telling this story to where I could talk about burning the book without pain. It pained me. That's how much it meant to me. And now, I'm on the further end of things. I can get Social Security at the end of the year. I can't believe it. I'm taking it, believe me. I've been paying out of that. I've been paying them since... But now that I'm on the other end, my goodness, how futile, how to have sold my soul. Even if the book, if I became a best-selling novelist, wrote great novels, I look at it now, thank God, and I can write for the Lord, write something. I guess every writer wants to write for eternity. You live with that hope, but this is a way to really write for eternity, literal eternity. And anyway, I guess I'd end, I don't know most of you, though I know more of you than I thought. See some old friends. And but I don't know your hearts, and you could be lifelong Adventists. And see, that book wasn't the evil. It was my relationship to the book. I made it my God. And as we close, I want to close with prayer. I'm just going to pray that, you all, I don't know any of you or most of you, and I don't know any of your hearts. And I'm just going to pray for you tonight that if there is something, I don't care if you've been a lifelong Adventist, I don't care if you're an elder or a pastor or an ordained, it doesn't matter. It's idolatry is you don't have to just sit there and bow down to statues of fish and bulls and goats to be caught up in idolatry. It's a lot more subtle than that. I mean, that book was my idol. And I just want to pray that, and if there's anyone here doesn't have to have all the drama of the story. I mean, it could be a lot less dramatic than that, but I think the principle is the same for every one of us. So let's just close our eyes in prayer, and I want to just pray. Okay. Father, again, I thank you for, even after all these years, I marvel of the world's billions. And you were so close to me, to have arranged things so custom for me. I marvel at that. I don't know how you could have done it, and yet you did it, and I'm so grateful. And Heavenly Father, I know there's not a person here whom you don't love as much as you love me, and you love them as much, and you care as much for them now as you did for me then. And so I lift up this entire congregation, anybody and everybody who's here. And Heavenly Father, if there's someone here, any age, any stage in their life, any role in the church, if there's anything at all that they're clinging to, if there's anything at all in their life which is in danger of being to them what that book was to me, Father, I pray that in the same way you touched me in that room over 42 years ago, that you will touch them even right now and bring conviction and let them know that they have to make a choice. Lord, it was my choice. I didn't have to do it. The mysterious free will, this gift of free will, the sacred gift that rather than deny it, you went to the cross for us. That using that gift, they will choose you and burn their novel, whatever it is. And I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Clifford. Appreciate that.
Sure.
I'm grateful when God takes one thing away, He gives
Sure.
a multitude more, and He's given you many, many books.
This just came out, huh?
This just came out, hot off the presses, his newest book. Thanks to Dale Galusha at CDA Adventist, we get to present it to him.
Oh, really?
So it's perfect timing.
You have no idea the pressure they put on me to spit this thing out. I don't usually, I'm afraid to look at it because someone just, all right. I will, whatever. Oh, all right, he probably butt dialed me anyway, so it's the only time he ever calls me. All right, well, all right, good. I can't believe how fast they got this thing out.
They got it out fast. And not only that, they gave it 300 more for you.
Oh.
This is a sharing book.
Oh, yeah.
Year. So, out in the lobby, we have refreshments. You're welcome to hang out and socialize, visit, and pick up a book for you and one to give to someone else. So, we have 300 of you guys are here for the first night of the presentation, so you can get first crack at the book.
Yeah, I don't feel comfortable. I labor over everything I do over and over, and I spit this thing out so fast, I'm afraid to. And what I do is I send them one chapter at a time. I never do that. I go over and over and over and over and over again. And this, I just finished the chapter and sent it to him. And, well, whatever. Too late now. Too late now. Too late now.
Well, just in case this one isn't exactly what you want it to be inside, we also have a list of a lot of his other books and the ways you can access them.
Yeah.
That's inside each one of the books. So you and your friends, and they can access this one as well as the others that he loves.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure, great, thank you. Yeah. All right, great. Man, I knew you lived somewhere around here, but I didn't know